I call upon Mr. B.G. Malik, Chairman Trust, to present the memento to Shrayan. This is Bindita handing the memento to Mr. B.G. Malik, who is presented to Shrayan. Thank you, sir. Now I request Shrayan to start with his presentation. Welcome, Shrayan.
Check. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Perfect. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I realize I'm the person standing between you going home and staying here, so I'll try to keep it entertaining. Can we dim these lights? Can you see it?
সামনেটা সামনের ওটা
I think in a little bit of time I won't be able to see you guys and I'll feel like I'm talking to myself, but that's alright. This is visible, right? Perfect. Firstly, thank you so much for coming. It's quite a crowd. I believe how we understand words or pictures, form opinions about it, it differs from person to person. Like I could look at a picture and I could think of it from a certain angle. And you could look at it and you could make out something else, and that's perfectly all right. It's an opinion at the end of the day. And that's important, which is why I would like to start the talk with a really famous quote, something that resonates with me. The most valuable acquisitions in a scientific or technical education are the general purpose mental tools which remain serviceable for a lifetime. I don't know what kind of an idea you might form about it, but I'll tell you what I figured out. If you are there in any kind of industry, be it academics or be it software or hardware, it could be anything, the one thing that you need to understand is things like technologies or a new domain or a new framework, new methodologies, these will come and go. And when it comes, the industry gets all crazy about it. Like there was a time back in the 80s when we had Pascal and Fortran, which were the most popular programming languages. And people who just learnt it never really understood that there would be a time when these would get replaced with something else. They learned something, but they did not want to unlearn what they learned and learn something new. They thought what they had was gold, and they don't need anything anymore. And today, if you go to California, you would see a lot of people homeless because they never bothered to move ahead with time. So when a C++ or a Java came down, they were happy with their Fortran and they thought their jobs were secure. So the one thing that stays with us for our life is something like our brain, our ability to comprehend, to understand, and also condense information and act on it. And that's something that you should always learn to use. Now, I know you guys are standing at a very important nexus, which is like the final years of college. I've been there too. And honestly, it's a bit unnerving. And there's a lot of confusion possibly in everyone's mind. I had that too, back in 2009, because I would look at this point, like a final year at college, like standing in a junction, and there are different roads going different ways. Like you have the MBA highway, or you have the public sector job highway, or you have the private engineering jobs, or you have the core jobs, and you have a lot of more opportunities. So which one do you take? And trying to understand what would work out best for you is not easy. I'm still confused about a lot of things. So the first thing that you need to understand, that the confusion that's going on in your minds about getting a job or continuing with your higher studies, that's absolutely normal. That's okay. Don't worry about it. So the great hurdle race after college. Now, it's very important to understand how you're going to leverage the information that you have with you right now so that it works out best for you in the future. Based on that, based on my understanding, based on how I felt during my journey from college to the industry and then back again into academics and then again back to the industry, I'd like to present 3 points for you. The first one, standing here now, what are the things that you should absolutely do, like a must-have? There's no way you should ignore these things. The first one, having a really good command over the language. India as a country has hundreds of languages, but when it comes to a professional setting, it's united by one language, that's English. And there's no two ways to it. I've had the opportunity to work not just in the Indian subcontinent, but also in other different continents and different parts of the world, and everyone speaks English in business. There would be a time when you possibly have a brilliant idea, but just because you do not have a really good understanding of the language, you end up missing the bus because you're trying to explain it to someone, you're giving it your best shot, but because of a difficulty with a foreign language, like English is kind of a foreign language for us, right? Just because of that difficulty, you end up missing something that's possibly critical in your career. So do not worry about it so much. So do not worry about it so much right now, but what's really important is you have a good command over the language. The second point, reading. I know you guys read a lot of those technical books because of your studies or anything else. Reading a journal always helps. It helps you not just understand what the world around you is doing, but also it kind of gives you a context about where you stand. And you never know, it might actually help you start and also fuel a conversation with someone else. You could meet a very interesting person and maybe that person actually has a job for you. But if you do not know how to communicate with him in a very positive way, it might get a little difficult. The third one, which I believe is possibly the most important one, this photo on the right, it's called Bloom's taxonomy. Do you see the base one? I'm not sure if you can see it, but this one, it's remember. So it's okay, I'll read it out for you. That's okay. So the base one is remember. So imagine going back to your school days when you were pretty much memorizing everything without trying to actually understand what it does, what it means. You just try and memorize it. Like, let's say, like India's population. It's a big number. You just memorized it. Having that information is handy, but you're not able to use it. Then you go a step higher, and it's called understand. As you move ahead in your career, you get a better understanding of things. And Now with this information about India's population, and let's say also India's India's population and also India's total area, you're able to understand where we stand, the number of people versus the area we have for ourselves. Third one, you apply this knowledge. How do you apply it? You apply it and find out the population density. And then you understand a little bit more upon analyzing it. You understand that there are parts of India where you can't live, like the desert. But there are areas which are really, really very populated because they offer a lot of business opportunities, like let's say a Bombay or a Calcutta or a Delhi. So you're trying to apply all this knowledge that you basically memorize once, and now you're understanding it, and now you try to evaluate it. You try to understand how we are placed on an international context. And finally, at the highest level, you create, which is where you guys should be. You have all the basic understanding of engineering or MBA, and it's not just about knowing a few laws or knowing a few theorems or few examples or experiments. It's actually being in a position where you can actually apply this knowledge and create something. And this could be anything, like let's say in today's context, it could be an app. Do you guys know about Uber? I hear a few yeses, so I'll just talk a little bit about it. So basically it's crowdsourcing your car. So how it works in the United States is kind of different from how it works here. I did take an Uber, it was kind of different. It's like a taxi service here. But in the United States, let's say you have a car and you're driving down from, let's say, the college to Calcutta. And on the way, I need a ride. I need a ride, I don't have my own car. So what I do is I switch on my app and I tell the app that I need to get from, let's say, a Srirampur to Park Street, maybe. And since you're on the way and you have this app, you actually see that there's someone who's willing to share this ride with me. So the person picks me up in his car and he drops me and he gets the money. So again, in the context of what I just talked about, so if you have an understanding about India's density, you would be able to know where is it that people need a lot of rides like this. Where would I be able to get business? And that's when you create something. It's very important to understand this because this kind of helps you with your projects. Be it a hobby project, be it an academic project, any kind of a project. Other than this, other than what's already on the slide, what I think would be really, or rather helped me a lot, is something like developing a habit. I have a habit of writing a lot. So whenever I was actually in a classroom, I used to take a lot of notes. It's not possible that human brain cannot remember everything. Or if someone asked you to do something, my mother keeps asking me to do things and I don't remember, and the next time she's like, have you done it? I'm like, no, I didn't write it down. But when I'm actually in a professional setting, or let's say in an academic setting, I actually write it down, and that way I always remember. It's important to develop a habit. A habit helps you stay on the track. For the next one, things that would be good to have. Not the top priority ones, but something that kind of gives you a bonus. First one, finding a mentor. This really helped me out. I was not really used to the idea that I could actually have a mentor when I was in college. Like when I was doing my bachelor's, I didn't have a mentor. I took the courses, I studied, and that's about all I did. But a mentor is someone who has actually seen the waves go by. They've actually seen how the industry works, or if he's someone or she's someone from academia, maybe someone who has been in academia for a really long time and can guide you in some way. You can find a mentor in your professors, or maybe an elder brother, or even your father, or anyone for that matter. Sorry. It's very important to have someone who can guide you to a certain bit. The second one, this is a favorite of mine. This is a Raspberry Pi, which is kind of really popular now with a lot of embedded engineers So this is basically a computer. So basically your entire CPU on a small chipset, which is a little bit bigger than a credit card. And it's ridiculously cheap. In the United States, it's a $35 thing, but here I think it's about 2,900 rupees. So it's a cheap computer. But the reason I'm talking about it here is because it helps you build something. This is like a building block, like those Lego block sets. On its own, it can do a few things, but with your imagination, you can build on it. And that's really important because that, again, connects back to the idea about the Bloom's taxonomy that I just talked about, where you actually create something. So being able to create can help you in numerous ways. I did my first resume when I was in third year, I think. Yes, and SN Ma'am helped me out with my first resume. Now, the way we actually build our resumes here, we talk a lot of technical jargon, right? Like you would possibly write something like programming language is known, and then C, C++, and a Java, and a PL SQL, or Node.js, and a lot more things. There's nothing wrong in that. There's nothing wrong. But a lot more solid way of actually giving out this data would be in the form of projects. Like if you have a project where you've built a library application, by mentioning about that project on your resume, it not just tells the employer that this person actually knows how to build things, it also tells him that inherently he's already aware of the programming languages that might be used. Like, let's say if you have a web-based library software that you make, it could possibly use something like a HTML or a JavaScript or a PHP. So you don't have to explicitly mention that I know these languages. It comes out through the form of your project in a lot more concrete way. And now for the third one, things that can be like totally catastrophic. And again, like you get it, it can do a lot of damage, especially where we all stand right now, because the world is moving around so fast. What's relevant today is possibly down the drain tomorrow. The first one, procrastination. I don't know if you can read it, but it's a pretty fancy word, procrastination. What it basically means is the action of delaying or postponing something. We all do this. We all do this. Like the one rule that I've found out is, let's say if there's something that can be done in 2 or 5 minutes, do it right away. You know why? Because if you do not do that, you're going to spend the next 10, 15 minutes thinking about doing it. Yeah, I was supposed to do that, but I'll do it a bit later. I'll do it a bit later. And you end up spending possibly more than half an hour, and then you finally get to doing it, which means you've already wasted half an hour on it, and now you're actually getting back to the work and doing something which might not even be so relevant anymore. So when you have something on your hands, do it. The second one, again, I'm not sure if you can read it, but what it says is, I'm very busy doing things I don't need to do in order to avoid doing anything I'm actually supposed to be doing. It's something that strikes a chord with all of us, right? We go on binge watching Netflix or a YouTube video or listening to songs when I should actually be doing the assignment or something more constructive. We have all done that. I'm not saying it's a sin, but try and work your way around it so that you keep up your productivity. Because at the end of the day, everyone has a limited amount of time to do things. The second one. Sorry. So moving ahead from there, what's really important is finding an approach towards doing things. Be it your project, be it planning about your higher studies, be it planning about your job interviews, it could be anything. But there are a few definitive approaches that I think would help you a long way. This is a famous quote by a renowned scientist, Richard Feynman. Science is what we have learned about how to keep from fooling ourselves. There's one particular approach that I would like to start talking about, and that is the curiosity-driven approach. being naturally curious about things will possibly accelerate your learning experience. If you look at something and it looks like magic to you, like, let's say, you want to write something on a computer. So you just, like, fire up a notepad or some kind of an application, and then you just type and you save. There's nothing wrong in it. But you should be curious about how actually the thing works. So when you actually double click on it, what exactly happens in the background? How does this notepad magically appear? And when I'm writing it, where does it actually save it? Having a curiosity towards most things in life will actually make sure that you go a long way. I'd like to move to the next one, which is again building up on the approaches that are going to help you. The first one that is immensely necessary, especially for people like you who is in the technological domain or maybe even the management domain. It's called the what, why, and the how. So if someone gives you an assignment, before you start copying it from your friend, before you start doing something like that, you actually question it, like, what exactly is it? So if someone asks me, so let's say, I'll try to explain it. So when I visited SKFGI a couple of weeks back, I had this talk with BNB sir and SN ma'am, and they told me about this talk that they would really want me to give you guys. So I went back home and I could have just copied stuff from here and there and, like, make a slide deck out of it. But I tried to put myself in your shoes. I tried to go back in 2008 when I was in my third year. I tried to understand what was going on through my head. That was the what part of it. Like, what exactly is it that I need to do? The second one, why? Why do I need to do it? This is important because it's very closely tied in this whole thing. Why do I need to do it? Obviously to make you guys understand a few things, to tell you about how the journey is, the journey that I've gone through. And then lastly, how? How do I do it? A PowerPoint presentation is possibly the best way to do it. Going ahead to the next point, the 5 recursive whys. So basically, if you get stuck somewhere with some kind of a problem, do you just go around looking for help, or do you try to analyze it? You try to analyze it, right? Now, how do you actually analyze something? You try to get to the root cause. Now, getting into the root cause isn't always so easy. You need to understand what went wrong and how do I correct it. Scientifically, if you actually ask 5 recursive whys, you typically get to the root cause of it. I'll try to explain with an example. I don't know if you can read this, but what happened at a company was there was an employee whose last name was Null. That's Null. And when they tried to process his payroll, obviously all of this data was going into the database. And when it goes into the database and someone's last name is Null, you get an exception because Null in SQL lingo is pretty much like 0. So this person was not getting his payroll processed. They figured it out, obviously, but you need to ask a lot of whys. So when you're trying to write software or when you're trying to build something and an error comes up, you try to analyze what went wrong in a very systematic way. There was this time when I was trying to write a code where the idea was to just open a text file, write some data in it, and then save it in a local directory. And it just wouldn't work. It kept failing. I had no idea what was going wrong. It took me a while, but I eventually got to it. What happened was, I was trying to, I checked my code. There was nothing wrong with the syntax. There was nothing wrong with the construction, nothing wrong with the logic. But what had happened, which again I found out by asking 5 recursive whys, is that it was trying to write this file in a location where I did not have a write access. So this is just an example. It's just an example about how you can actually address a root cause, because you'll keep running into a lot of problems at work, or maybe even in academics when you're writing something or conducting some kind of an experiment where you don't have a guidebook to help you out. And finally, the observe and learn. I'll try to tell you a story about why this is important. There was this time in a huge zoo. There were a lot of lions, and a new lion was brought into the zoo. The new lion doesn't know anyone. It goes in and tries to understand the demographic. So there are a lot of groups of lions who are, like film buffs. They keep talking about films. There are another set of lions who keep discussing politics. There are a lot of other groups of lions who are into different kinds of things. And then there's this one lion who doesn't mingle with anyone. He's always on his own. He doesn't talk to anyone, and the rest of the people are actually a little bit afraid of him. They don't really go and talk to him because they don't know. They can't really gauge this lion. So this new lion goes to this solitary lion and tells him that, I'm new here. I don't really know anyone. But from the little bit that I've seen, you don't really mingle with anyone in the group. Why? So this lion tells the new lion that you look at all these other groups, they are busy in their own world. Someone's discussing politics, someone's discussing literature, but they've all forgotten to focus on the main problem. So this new lion asks, what is the main problem? So the lion says, you need to observe the fence. So basically the point was that the lion wants to escape from the zoo, right? And down the passage of time, they kept getting engrossed into different kinds of groups, different kinds of things. And they forgot their sole focus, that is to escape from the zoo. So this lion had still got his focus intact. Like, I need to keep observing the fence. And the moment I see there's an escape route, I'm going to take it. So you need to observe. You need to observe a lot of things, and you can learn it on your own. It's especially in the United States, it's just so very different, where you don't really have someone helping you out. If you run into a trouble, you try to troubleshoot it yourself. You can go and find someone for help, but it's always appreciated that you figure out things on your own. I'd like to talk about the next bit, which is getting very deeply integrated with whatever work you're doing. You need to love what you're doing, because otherwise you're not going to give it your best. It's again all tied, it's all in tandem. If you have your foundations very strong and you're trying to build something on it, that is going to be good. If you don't have your foundation strong and you're then trying to build something on it, it is going to be difficult, honestly. So you need to understand the core basics, the core theory, the core concepts. There are no two ways about it. You need to concentrate on your studies. You need to understand the logic behind most of the things, because only then can you move ahead and understand more and more things. It's very interesting because I guess a lot of you people know about databases, right? You must have done some kind of courses. Not important, but when you're trying to display a database in a schema, this is what you use. It's something like a small cylinder. And Oracle, who is kind of a big boss when it comes to databases, they have designed all of their headquarter buildings in the shape of databases. So this is just an example about how tightly the integration needs to be, so you feel connected to whatever it is that you're doing. Up next, something that's again very difficult for us, especially when you're trying to do something, failure will come at some point. You might try really hard and it might not really work out. And you don't need to get upset about it. Obviously, it would be great if it just succeeded on the first try. But the ability to handle failure is equally important. The Australian cricket team, this is a small snippet that I had read once. I think it was an excerpt from Harsha Bhogle. He tells us about the Australian cricket team and how it's chosen. They would never choose someone who has never failed in their life. It's all right to fail. It's absolutely all right. I've tried doing a lot of things and I've failed in some. I've had success in a few. But don't let a few failures stop you. If you're on the right track, it's all right. It's all right to fail once in a while. Don't worry so much. And that's what the Australian cricket team does. If they actually get someone who has never failed, they can't really trust that person, because if you're someone who has never failed and then you for the first time you actually face failure, you might not be able to handle it. So that's again really important. With that, I'd like to move ahead with one of the main things that I guess you guys are here for. So again, standing at the very important nexus that you are at, where you have different avenues opening, like a few of the BTech students might be interested in doing an MBA, a few might be interested in going for higher studies in the form of a master's and a PhD, or a few others who would be interested in taking up a job. All of these are perfect routes. There's nothing wrong with it. I can tell you a little bit about the whole process in the United States. I guess you guys already know quite a bit about how it works in India with the GATE exams and the other different kinds of exams that you have for masters, as well as CAT and the other ones for studying in India. For studying abroad, you typically start with two of the tests, which is either your GRE and TOEFL, or maybe a GMAT and IELTS. So GRE is basically an acronym for Graduate Record Examination. You have three components in it. The first one is the mathematics, which has a lot of logical reasoning. There's no probability though. It's mostly a lot of logical reasoning and geometry, trigonometry. And then you have the verbal part, which is typically to understand your command over English. This is kind of tricky, this particular segment. It typically asks you very complicated questions about comprehension, or it could also be about antonyms and synonyms, or fill in the blanks, things like those. And lastly, you have an analytical essay writing composition, where you're given a topic and you basically have to write about it, and you are graded on a scale of 0 to 5. The entire GRE structure is over 2 hours. So in 2 hours, you'll have to get done with your mathematics part as well as your English and the essay writing part. There's a tiny bit of difference between the GRE and the other exams like a CAT. GREs are more computer adaptive tests, not evaluation tests. So the first question that you typically get is of an average difficulty level. And if you answer it correctly, the next question would be a little difficult, not too much. But if you answer the first one wrong, the second question would be a tad bit easier one, an easier question. TOEFL is again an acronym. It's Test of English as a Foreign Language. TOEFL it's again divided into 4 components. You have the speaking part, where you'll actually have to record something. They record it via the microphone. And then you have the writing part, where you're actually given a topic and you write about it. Then you have the reading part, which is basically a comprehension. And then you have the listening part, where you actually have to put on headphones and they're going to play a small audio snippet. It's typically something like a story, and then they ask you questions about it. It's a pretty simple test, and both of these tests, they are very straightforward. It's not very difficult to ace them. The next stage, which is again a tricky part, is the whole application process, applying to different universities. One thing that you should keep in mind when you're going in for your GRE or TOEFL is that on the date of, like right after the test, you can apply to 4 universities for free. You can apply to more later on, but you'd need to pay for that. So this is something that no one told me, and I wish I had this information when I was in your seat. So the application process typically consists of a few documents. It starts with the statement of purpose, which is typically like a 2-page essay where you write about yourself, about what you've achieved, and where you want to be. And typically, based on my interaction with the professors, I've understood that this is a really important thing. You need to be very clear about what you want to become eventually, what you would want to work on. The second one is the letter of recommendation, which is something you can get from your professors. Dr. Biswas gave me one, and that really helped me. So the letter of recommendation would be from a professor where he or she would actually talk about you, talk on your behalf about how you were as a student. And again, this is something that's very critical in every university application. The next step after you have gotten an acceptance is your visa interviews. Typically, they'll ask you a simple question like, where are you going to study and what is it that you're interested in? Something's fairly basic. And finally, these are things that are a part of the immigration process, like curriculum, practical training, or OPT. These are things that you don't need to concern yourself with right now. But if going abroad for a bit like a advanced education is something that's really on your mind, now would be a really good time to think, because if you're somewhere like in 3rd year or 4th year, it perfectly makes sense, because once you're graduated from school, you can, like, I did not go for my higher educations right away. I decided to work because I wanted that industry experience, and that can definitely help you too, because it kind of helps you understand where you stand on a technical standpoint, and it also helps you evaluate your peers. Plus, it's a little bit of breather from work because you have been studying for the last 21 years of your life, and then you can take a small break before you decide to go again, should you decide to do that. For my next slide, it's kind of interesting. When I first started thinking about this talk, I did not know what I should talk about. And then I thought crowdsourcing some information would be a good idea. So I went to my Facebook page and I posted a question. I don't know if you guys can read it, but here's what I wrote. I would really appreciate if everyone reading this helped me with an answer. My first question was, during your final year in college, what scholastic or career thoughts plagued you? So what were the things that were keeping you up at night? And secondly, looking back, what was that one piece of career advice you wish someone had given you? And a lot of my friends brilliantly answered this question, and it was kind of interesting to see that most of these people who are fairly advanced in their own lines of work, they all have the same complaints. So my first friend, he actually talks about how he could never get a mentor, and he wished he had a mentor back then. And I told myself that this is something that absolutely resonates with me, because I wish I had someone I could actually go and talk to on a daily basis. Maybe someone from the industry, maybe someone from the college, could be anyone. A few other friends, I wish you guys could read it, but it's a little tiny, the font. But long story short, what everyone had to say was, you need to take the first step. You need to go out and talk to different people. You need to get your perspectives. You need to get a lot of advice from different people who are in the industry, or possibly somewhere else, maybe someone like a professor, someone like an elder brother, or anyone. It's really important to get a mentor. And with that, I've come to my last slide, where I'd like to tell you a few things. Firstly, I have all the data that you need. I don't know if you can read this, but I've created a URL. I can just paste it somewhere else or give it to someone who can share it with you, where I've kept all the slide decks, the slide deck that I just used today, and also all the information about sample letters of recommendation or sample statements of purpose. You can actually look into those, and if it helps you, great. If you have more questions, I've left my email address right there, which is my first name and my last name at yahoo.com. You can shoot me a question anytime. I'd be more than happy to help. I'd like to know if you guys had any questions, because I wanted to keep it more interactive. So if you guys have any kind of questions about, yes, please. Could you please repeat that? The best time to take your GRE, is that right? Are you an MBA student or a BTech? All right. I'd possibly say the start. So again, there are two sessions. You have the fall session and you have the spring sessions. Fall is the academic year that starts in September, and spring is what starts in January. It's a lot better to start with the fall session, which is in September, in order to get an admission and actually give your GRE and everything. You should be typically done with your GRE by October, at worst, your GRE and your TOEFL. So let's say this is 2016. So if you're done with your GRE and TOEFL by the month of October this year, you start your applications, because the application deadlines for the fall semester, so that typically ends in January. So by January, you have sent in all your applications, you're all set. You get your acceptance letters sometime around February, March. Once you get that, you need to start your visa processing. You have a lot of time for that, but October this year would be your best year. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Do we have any other questions? Come on. Yes, please.
So when you left India for your higher studies, what was your first experience? What was going through your mind? Tell us something more.
Okay. So the first time I left India was in 2010. That was not for my higher studies, but in 2013, August, is when I actually left the country for my higher studies. I think I was a little worried about a lot of things. That was what was going on obviously the excitement was there, moving to a different continent. But at the back of my mind, I was always worried, because I've been working for the last few years. I haven't been in academics for some time. Like, how would I be able to adapt to this new geography? And fortunately, it worked out very well. I mean, it's a lot more independent over there, but it's also very simple to understand. So I guess confusion was what was going on in my mind. Yes, I think we have a question. Yes, please go ahead.
First of all, I would like to thank you on my friends' behalf, on all of my friends' behalf, for presenting such a wonderful presentation to us.
Thank you.
My question is, you mentioned that we should read books, right?
We should keep?
Read books.
Yes, absolutely.
What kind of books would you refer?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. You have your technical books already, right? You're learning a lot from those technical books. It's important to read maybe a few technical journals, which kind of gives you an idea about what the rest of the world is working on. But besides technical jargons, I think fiction really helps me a lot. Read any book with in the genre of fiction, that actually helps you with your imagination in several ways. And the thing is, all these things are connected. Like, when you read fiction, you start developing a very healthy, imaginative mind. And that helps you with your day-to-day work, your life, your technical projects, be it anything. So that's what I would recommend otherwise.
Shrayan, could you tell us how you experienced interacting with the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella?
He was like a rock star. I mean, yeah, he's a very busy man, firstly. So a few of us interns had been invited, and it was a pretty small event, and we were sitting in front of the dais, and we had no idea when he's going to turn up. And then suddenly, and there were a lot of black curtains behind, and then suddenly he passed the curtain and he's there. And he was very witty. I mean, one of the responses that I picked up from him, someone asked him like, "How are you doing?" Now, most of the people would say, "I'm fine, I'm good." He said, "I'm peachy." So that's another word for I'm doing excellent. And then he asked us a lot of questions, and the main difference that I found there was at Microsoft, they would tell you what your work is. That's all well, fine and good, but at the end of the day, they would always say that you create what you want to create. Because if you're actually given that independence, and you're a responsible person, if you're given the independence of work and time, you're not someone who's going to waste it. You would actually work on something. So there was this time when I had talked to my manager during my second internship. I asked him like, "What project do you want me to work on?" And this is exactly what he told me. He told me that it's not what I want you to work on, it's what you want to work on. And that was a lot of independence from me, because in India that's not how it works. Your manager typically tells you what he wants you to do. But this independence obviously has to be handled with a lot of caution. But going back to Satya Nadella, he was a really energetic person, and he was very witty. That's all I remember from it.
Sir, if I may have the last question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, sir, how did you go about preparing for your GRE or and/TOEFL? I mean, did you have a flowchart and a algorithm for it, or did you just give it to your instincts?
That's a good question again. So for your GRE, typically for the quantitative part, honestly, it's very easy. The math is very easy. It's basically high school math, like your trigonometry. You know what is the formula for the diameter, for the circumference, mensuration based. For the English part, I referred Barron's. So Barron's is a pretty standard name in word list. So they have a 5,000 long word list. So basically 5,000 words. So basically remembering what they mean. But for a few of the words, again, based on what I talked about, you should try to understand the concept behind it. Like, there's a difficult word called anachronic. Anachronic might not mean something to you right away, but if you split up the word, it's ana and chronic. Chronic means time, so it's referring to time, and ana is typically like kind of negative. So anachronic essentially means something that is out of time. So if I had a typewriter here on my desk instead of a computer, that would be anachronic. So I basically did a lot of simulation tests, a lot of mock tests, because I think that's really important, because it's a timed exam. So you work on your skills around it. For writing, I used to typically write, random essays and get it checked with my peers or with my sister or anyone. So I would say you parallelly prepare for your math, and also for your math is again very easy, and you also parallelly prepare for your verbals. So these are the two areas that you really need to concentrate on. For TOEFL, honestly, it's not difficult. TOEFL is totally based on English, very simple English. I used YouTube to basically understand the flow of the test and also what kind of questions. They had a lot of mock questions or a lot of questions from previous papers. So that's how I went about it. All right.
I thank Shan for giving us a very, very wonderful presentation and his experience he had in the United States. And we had such lovely questions from our students. I hope you have benefited from it. So thank you once again, and a very big round of applause for Shravan. Thank you, Shravan.